I'm so glad to bring you this conversation today with Monica Diaz. This is a timely conversation that we're having, and I would absolutely love to share this with you as soon as we possibly can after we have this conversation. Now, Monica and I met at Campbell Soup. Monica has over 25 years of experience in the field of human resources, particularly diversity and inclusion. I mean, she's been with as a vice president and chief diversity and inclusion officer with Campbell Soup. She has been with ESPN, Blue Cross Blue Shield. So she's got a ton of experience, and she has recently written a book that we're gonna talk about, from intent to impact. And this book is an amazing book, and I've started reading it. I haven't gone through the entire thing. I just got it, but I can't wait to continue to dig into this book. So, Monica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amir. It's a pleasure speaking with you again.
No, pleasure is absolutely mine. So why don't we start with your background and sort of how you came to this point in your career?
Well, happy to speak a little bit about that. I like to say that I am on what I call the 3.0 of my career and my life, to be really honest. The 1.0 was the first 15 years of my career as an HR professional, and by design, and that was my plan. I worked as an HR business partner. I work in talent acquisition and in learning and development, compensation and benefits. I really wanted to be a well-rounded HR person. So that was by design. And fortunately, the companies that I had the pleasure of working with through the years, which I'm still very proud of these organizations, gave me the opportunity to do so. So that was my 1.0. Then it was the 2.0. The 2.0 was working for 15 years as deep in diversity and inclusion globally with global brands. And I didn't plan for that one as much as I did to my 1.0. It was a combination of readiness, serendipity, and just a passion. But I started figuring that the diversity and inclusion, and it was diversity back then, not inclusion was not even part of the equation, started becoming a bigger part of my work in human resources. So that's how I gradually came immersed in this area of diversity and inclusion and working on it at global companies. And now my 3.0, it's about putting it all together. It's about putting down these opportunities to see how we can work on human differences, work with human differences, and integrate it in the way in which we support talent, we develop talent in the organization. So that's what I'm saying. 3.0 is putting it all together. And part of this new stage in my career, in my life, was to imagine if I were to do it all over again, what would I do differently? What did I learn from the brands and the companies that I work for that really work, strategies that really work, and others that did not? And if I were to do it all over again, what would I say? And that's what gave birth to the book.
Love it. And I tell you what, just the title itself for me is so powerful because, we sort of judge ourselves by our intentions, but sometimes our action doesn't really follow our intentions, right? So from intent to impact. But so we're going to unpack what's in the book, but let's kind of start with a broader conversation. You've been involved with diversity and inclusion work for a long time, and it's always been an important conversation, but here recently it's become even more prominent. So what's different this time, and what sort of trends are you seeing? What is motivating companies to get engaged or not get engaged? What's going on there?
Yeah, certainly this is a different time. And still some people might say, well, this too shall pass. Maybe it's a thing of the moment. But let me share with you some of the things for which, again, I've been in this field for a long time. There's different elements now that are coming into play. And the first element that I think is different this time is socially. There's three dimensions. Is what is different socially, what is different in business, and to be really honest, what is different politically. And not that I want to get into the political partisan conversation, but it has become a bigger part of the discussion. Some of the social issues that we are managing within business have become tremendously politicized, and that has had a tremendous impact. So socially, it's an interesting intersection this year. If you only take this year, okay, global phenomena like a pandemic, national, local, US-centric issues like the ubiquitous predominance of racial injustice, of inequality, have created a greater visibility of what is it that are the extremes in our society, the extremes of differences that do not connect, the extremes of people who do not necessarily focus on understanding or learning about each other, but on finding reasons to oppose each other. That is what's happening socially, right? And because we don't live in bubbles, we actually live in, in integrated lives in society and in business, that has extrapolated to the conversation that is happening in business. Before, we used to say, well, no, you go to work and you leave yourself at the door, you check out the door, your issues you leave at home. This is business, this is not personal. All of that has gone out the door. In business, those rules that we understood and learned about, that this is when you go to work, this is how you operate, are not there anymore. In business, we're getting the advent of millennials that are coming to middle age now. Okay, we have older millennials and we have Gen Zs coming into the work environment. And they do expect that their lives are going to be part of their work. They taught us how to live integrated lives, and integrating their realities in their communities and in society is part of the conversation that you expect that companies are going to have. They expect their leaders to have a conversation about these things, to take a stand in certain issues and in certain things that are important to them. So that is not going away. That is a permanent change, because generationally, this is the talent that we're having. So that's why business is seeing such an impact. It's just the people who are coming to work. That's not going back, right? And the other phenomena that we're seeing that is different is this, again, polarization that we are all aware of. It's a different, if we just take it for the US, it's a different America. It's a different reality. Will that change in the future or not? Well, we'll see. We'll see soon. But it is absolutely impacting the way in which companies, businesses have had to decide, not only because of their talent coming in and expecting these conversations to happen, but how are we going to deal with in the business with fragmentation, with complete polarization of how people think that we should run a business, that we should kind of take action in society or not. Clearly, this is just this intersection of what we are seeing in society, in business, and in politics. That is what is different these days.
Yeah, and the cumulative effect, though, it just feels like it's exponential. It's not like 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, but now it's like everywhere you look, there's division, and there is, lack of unity, and there's, a perception anyway of, we are more different and then we are the same, and so on and so forth. It's just unprecedented.
And because of that, Amir, the role of leadership has always been touted as very important. But there were guidance. There was kind of a perspective on how is it that a leader should behave. Yeah. Those things are out the door. And leaders are scrambling, literally scrambling to figure out, how am I supposed to act on this day? What am I supposed to say? How should I even talk about these things or not? Leaders are really trying to learn it as they go, when they were not expecting that. The expectation was that I know how to lead. Some CEOs have been in place for 5, 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden they are out of a playbook. It's hard to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Is it right if I say certain words or wrong certain ways? And the impact in business is that some of the behaviors that are causing leaders to be out of the posts have everything to do with how do they relate to the societal issues and to their employees. It's not necessarily their financial performance, the only thing that will make them successful or unsuccessful.
Yeah. And, I know that in the day and age where everything is on social media and things go viral and that sort of thing, we kind of have a cancel culture, if you will, and all of a sudden one act may actually get a certain kind of reaction. But I know in the old days, um, at least my experience was that if people knew that my heart was in the right place, they would tend to forgive me for any mistakes that I made. They would give me some feedback. I'm not talking about just racial, discrimination or anything like that. But it's like if something just didn't sit right.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to know that our leaders have their heart in the right place. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not about just getting everything right, but you've got to at least have your heart in the right place. That you say, look, one group of people is not any less valuable than another group of people.
Yes, and it's interesting because we have typically talked about, like as of, late years, like about authenticity, about leaders who actually can communicate and can relate. But in my book, I try to define what that meant. How do you really talk about authenticity when maybe there's no connection there's not clarity for leaders on how to think about human differences? And by the way, I rather say human differences than diversity in many instances, because from a US perspective, that has a particular definition in people's minds. And when you take that concept globally, it may not translate the same way. So but when we talk about human differences, we could talk about different dimensions of differences that can resonate in different places. So when a leader wants to show up in an authentic way and have the heart in the right place, people want to see what is in that heart. And leaders sometimes don't necessarily have not come to terms with how they are going to think about these human differences. What is their stand? And is it appropriate or adequate to even talk about it as a leader of an organization, right? They have to make sure that they are taking care of their employees, but also their stakeholders, their board. It is a difficult space in which they do not necessarily feel all the time that they are versed enough or comfortable enough to know how to actually act.
Yeah.
So in my book, I talked about leaders who actually get it. Those leaders who know how to talk about this topic and those who don't necessarily get it, because people will notice that right away.
Yeah. And so what are some of the differences? What are the differences between organizations, companies that just basically stop at intent versus those who are actually realizing the impact?
Yes, I think that there's certain things that, again, when I went back into my memories and experiences and the stories that I gathered, my book is full of stories of leaders and how they interacted. I identified that there were different levels in which leaders and organizations could decide to interact, to connect, to act, to engage. And it's not complicated. Some leaders engage and have a level of impact that is very personal. And that's what I call like the personal level of impact, not only intent, but impact. It's leaders that, have a conversation with people that actually connect. They feel heard. They have one-on-ones. People gravitate towards their organizations. People want to work with these leaders. They're inspirational. And they express that level of impact. They execute on it based on one-on-one interactions. People get to know them. They get to know the leader, and the leader knows them. That's personal impact. It's based on experiences, charisma. It's that level of leadership. But there's another level of leadership, and it's broader. It's the impact that a leader can have in their organizations, right? So not only in a one-on-one interaction that is fruitful and it inspires people, but what are the actions that a leader can take in their organization that actually say, this is how we're going to think about our differences. This is how we're going to innovate together. This is how we're going to manage conflict. We're not going to shy away from conflict because we have different perspectives. This is how we're going to be more inclusive, and then act on it. So that's the leadership impact, not only personal one-on-one, but leadership impact speaks about the organization. And it comes from that space of, do they get it? Do they get what they're trying to achieve? And
Yeah.
the third level of impact is social. Some companies have gone beyond their borders, beyond their walls, to identify where do they take a public stand, where do they not only go, according to what everybody else is doing in their industry, but they decide that they're going to be the leaders of the pack. They're going to be the disruptors, okay? And that is social impact. That translates into, where do we take a stand? Where do we make political contributions or not, based on what this company is all about? And where do we just gather other companies within our same industry and establish forces of alliance to have an impact in education, to have an impact on inequality? So companies take a stand beyond their corporate responsibility or corporate citizenship department. That is the role of that department, to do that. But when a company starts taking those stands in specific areas, that's when we have that third level of impact, a social impact.
Okay. And what does that evolution look like if you think of a company that today is not doing really great, and let's just say there's some willingness that they want to do better in this area, but they're not really sure where to start and what to do. What are some kind of baby steps that you can recommend to leaders out there?
I always think that it's important to start with self, right? Leaders typically, in the D&I space, it's very prominent for leaders to ask, people like me who work on this area and others, tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. But I seldom hear, what do you think I should learn? So it starts with that level of understanding that change starts with self. And it's, before you get into action to be really authentic, you have to go inwards and get some introspection and understand, what do I know and hold as my truth, my values? But what do I need to learn that maybe I don't know? And again, that's the difference of leaders who get it. They start asking more questions about what they need to learn about experience that maybe they didn't have before. Let me give you an example. One of the first stories that I tell in my book, it's about a leader who gets it. And this is a Caucasian man who grew up in the deep South of the United States. And he told me a story. He seemed to kind of like get it, as I feel like, hey, understand differences, was curious about, like things that he didn't know. And I asked him once, how do you clearly get it on human differences and connecting with people? Tell me how that happened. Is there something that you can recall that makes you the leader who you are, to understand people's differences? It's like, absolutely. I know exactly when that started. And he told me the story about growing up in the deep South of the United States. And as a white boy of around 8 years old, he was walking down the street with his father, another white gentleman. And he saw coming towards him, an older Black man. And he recalled how that gentleman, as he was approaching this white gentleman and his 8-year-old boy, he left the sidewalk, went into the street, and almost in a reverent way, let them go through. Well, he was standing on the street in a almost reverent way. What he told me about that experience is, as an 8-year-old boy, he asked his dad, why did he do that? This is an old man, and he's almost paying reverence to us and almost like bowing to us. Why is that? His father and him had a long conversation about differences. in that age and understanding. And this was during the time of the civil rights movement and things like that. So this was, again, within my lifetime. But before, we were kind of talking about diversity and inclusion in the way we do now, right? That experience marked him. He said, I couldn't understand. It just felt so unfair. Why would an old Black man would step aside to allow a young white boy of 8 years old go through the sidewalk? Why would that be? So that's an experience that for him marked him. And he was a gentleman, and he is a gentleman already in probably his 60s. And he still recalls that moment. He said, that's the moment when I got it. And from that moment on, he was able to build an understanding and being curious about the differences. The same way he asked his father when he was 8 years old, he kept asking, why is that? Why is that? When he saw something, he was keen enough to be observant and then ask the questions. Learning, what do I need to learn? So as a leader, some leaders have had those levels of experiences in their early experiences in their early life. Some have not.
Yeah.
I've asked leaders and people, did you recall a time in your life when you felt different? And some people cannot. Some people say, I'm having a problem, I'm having trouble with that question because I don't know. I don't know. So again, that's where we have room to build and have a different level of impact.
Yeah, it's really amazing when you have these personal experiences, the kind of difference that they make for you. I mean, for me, I can recall, I've been in a interracial marriage for almost 40 years, 39 years almost. And so we've got two kids who are biracial. And although I don't really talk about it that much, we've had a variety of experiences where, I learned that my daughter at the age of 9 was told by one of her friends that she couldn't be friends anymore because her parents said that, according to the Bible, they said that my daughter was going to go to hell because she is biracial. And at the same time, in the same place, we were at Dover, Delaware, and it's not like the stereotype of the Deep South or whatever, but we were refused service on the basis of our race. It was very, very clear. And in fact, we took the guy to court and we won, but our kids were with us and they witnessed this, like us being kind of practically thrown out of a restaurant, being refused service. So we used that as an opportunity, a teachable moment to let our kids know, to say, look, we live in a world where things like this happen sometimes, but then you've got to stand up for yourself and you got to deal with it and things like that. So these personal experiences are just so powerful.
They are.
Yeah, and in causing us to get it. But look, in the absence of those triggering incidents that cause somebody to get it, how do you actually get somebody to get it? Like, I know we've alluded to that, right? But what are some thoughts that you have around that?
Well, the first thing is have to recognize that that is something that is missing.
Yeah.
Right. Some people have been in environments in which they cannot recall. It's not that I'm saying it. They have shared with me that they don't recall a time in which they felt different. Mm-hmm. And when I say different, it's important to distinguish that different. When you ask people when they felt different, sometimes they relate stories on when they felt less than others, because those are painful situations. They felt less fortunate, less wealthy, less educated. So they felt less than others. Mm. But in the experience of this leader that I just told you about, he felt different, but not less than. Mm. He felt more than. And sometimes people don't necessarily take a minute to realize and to ponder, when is it that we feel less than or more than others? Because that's being different anyway.
Yeah.
When I've asked some people about when was the first time that you felt different and they cannot respond, it's helpful to hear the stories of others. Hear the stories of others who have felt different and what did that mean? So they can start identifying what are the opportunities that they have to learn. We can learn through the stories of others, but I think the most impactful way of learning is just having an experience ourselves. So I'll tell you an example of each of the two. There was another leader that told me once that, and it's the story that I also tell in my book, that he could not relate to the experience of the African American experience or people who are Black because he was not Black. So he was a white guy in his 60s as well, had silvery hair and a very crew cut haircut. And he said, I don't understand, and I will never be a Black man, so I cannot relate to the experiences and the pain. But as we were talking about, well, tell me when you felt different. So, you're trying to understand the reality of others, that you're never going to be them. But how about you? And then he started telling me about when he was, again, earlier in his life, that he had been bullied tremendously for many years. And you could see that when he was telling me the story, he was still blushing. He was still transfigurating almost. It was deeply emotional for him. He was a redhead. He used the word that some people that offended him, that he was ginger, and that is painful for people who have red hair. And he vividly told me about how that felt for him for many years. I was surprised because when I met him, there was no trace of red hair. There was only silver. So I said to him, so I can see how that still has an emotional impact in you. I can see it right now when you're speaking about that pain. Well, imagine that your hair would have not changed color, and that you would carry that experience and that pain of being bullied your whole life. How would that feel? You could not just leave it, like out the door or not bring it to work. So how would that feel? So that was the beginning of a conversation about, well, imagine that the color of your skin, you cannot leave it out the door, and it's not going to change when you get older. So he started processing how he can relate to his own pain and build a bridge to the understanding of the sentiments of others. So again, he thought he couldn't get it because he's not Black, but there was a space in which he could build a bridge between his own experience and the experience of others that he was trying to understand. So there
really
are
a
ways.
Great example. Yeah, that is a great way to do that. Yeah.
And then for some others who can just, there's very few people, but there are who say, I really cannot relate. Then, I wrote about immersion experiences in my book. How do you intentionally, if you're uncomfortable with a human difference that you're not aware of, didn't grow up with, how do you voluntarily and intentionally, intent is important as well, you insert yourself in those uncomfortable circumstances, in those unknown places, with a mindset of an explorer, with a mindset of not judging, with a mindset of just, let me insert myself in a space that is not the one that I understand, and let me see what I can learn, right? And I give the example of, is like, if you go, do your regular workout, like, and you, let's say you have a routine and that you go through a park and you, I don't know, run 3 miles through, around the park. You might go to the same park every day and you might make a routine and you're focused on your routine, right? The timing, your heartbeat, like if your shoes are comfortable or are too tight, you're focused on your routine. But you can go for years through a park and not realize, what kind of tree is that? What are the birds that are chirping, right? So you may be going through life, through business, with this routine, but not figuring out what is different that I'm not noticing until you sit on the bench and start listening to the chirping of the trees, or trying to identify what kind of trees are you running by every single day. That is inserting yourself in a space that maybe you have gone through before, but you're not paying attention to. When you just stop and are there not to run through a space, but learn about the space, that's immersion. That's allowing the environment to get inside of you instead of you going through the environment. That's another way. It's simple, but it has to be intentional of learning about what is not familiar to us.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, it's we're in autopilot most of the time, right? We're just kind of going somewhere, getting something done. We're not really paying attention. And truth is, I think, you know, just based on my own experience, most of the any kind of pain that I have personally experienced in this area has not really come from these radical groups who, you know, came and burned our house down or anything like that. It's just come from quote unquote good people who are just kind of who say hateful things and hurtful things, at least, without necessarily knowing that, you know, that's just not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I remember somebody, a really dear friend, you know, told many years ago. We were sitting by a lake at her house. We were visiting. As an older lady, and she turns to my wife and says, "You know, you're really a great person. You're not like Black people. You're just so awesome." and and in that moment, it was like,
Wow.
okay, I
Wow.
think
That
that
is
was
true.
meant as a compliment, but it really was an insult. So my wife's like, well, actually, all the Black people I know are kind of like me. So it's just like, you know, she's like a really good person, but she really didn't recognize that she's in autopilot, doesn't even recognize that, you know, saying something like that speaks to her view of an entire race.
Correct.
So when one emerges as a good person, it's like, wow, you're not like those guys. So yeah, I think we're all better off just paying attention to the trees and the birds and kind of all of that. But let's talk about another topic here that you address in your book. You talk about the 5 dualities of diversity and inclusion. Can you
Mm-hmm.
unpack that for us a bit?
Sure. First of all, I didn't start with this model in mind that I wanted to write about. Um, the dualities came to be the reflection of what I have learned. I've been taking notes, Amir, for probably 8 years. You know, doing this work, this is the kind of work when you work with people and when you're observing and trying to connect people and work across conflict and differences. This work changes you as much as you're changing the environment. It really
Yes.
does.
Yeah.
Because you learn something amazing almost like every single day. And there were certain days in which I just had to pause and say, like, what did I just experience? It was one, you know, there were those aha moments that you say, what did I just heard? What did I just experience? I'm not completely sure what this is. So I started taking notes of those experiences, of those moments, of those things that I was not sure what they meant, but I know they were significant because they were breakthroughs for me. So I started taking notes. And there were 8 years of notes. And when I decided that maybe I had enough to write an article, I started putting those notes together. And it was like pieces of a puzzle that just say, what does this experience mean? What did this experience mean? And then I started combining them. And certain connections started to emerge. The first duality that I was able to put together as such was connect and learn, which is duality number 1. And it was based on the experience of seeing how many examples I have jotted down on those notes on how people really connected based on their similarities. Hey, we are from the same town. We went to the same school. We both have 2 children. Or people look in any conversation that you have, look for the points of connection. Where are we similar? Because that brings camaraderie. It's comfortable. It creates energy. It's easy. And it creates a sense of joy and belonging that we all need. That's why we look for similarities. That's how the human, human race began. We were in tribes, right? Of people who were similar. So people have this natural gravitate to the commonalities that they make them connect.
Mm.
But then I had other examples in the notes that I've been taking about how many things could I learn. My aha moments did not come from people who were like me in many ways. It came from having conversations with people who were very different than me. That's what I learned the most. So when I say, when I thought about what is the benefit of connecting on our similarities, but what are the advantages of learning from our differences? That's, just to make it in a very business environment, that's where innovation actually occurs.
Mm-hmm.
When we're learning from our differences, not only connecting on our similarities. So that's how that first duality came about. I was just putting together the stories that I heard. And that's how this came to be. I didn't start with 5 dualities that, oh, this is a cool model, so I'm going to put it out there. There was just separate pieces in a puzzle that I started putting together. And after that, the duality that revealed to me, the first one was connect and learn. The second one was think and know. And I'll leave you to read the book to figure out that one. The third one was about pain and possibility. And that one I will tell you about. Some people are motivated to learn about differences because they want to mitigate pain. They want to mitigate conflict in the work environment. They want to work on D&I because they say like, okay, this is, how do people are kind of like discussing, they're polarized. So I don't want that in my business. Pain mitigation. And that's the motivation. But other leaders are motivated by possibilities. Imagine if we could create an organization that looked like this. It's a different motivation. So the strategy to influence a leader that is motivated by pain versus one that is motivated by possibility is very different. So that was the third duality. And then it's risk and invest. And the last one is perform and innovate. So I'll let you kind of read on those in the book. But this just gives you an example of how this came to be. It was just kind of like a reflection of what I learned and how I could explain that in the same simple way in which I learned it. I just had to summarize it.
No, I love it. I mean, for me, my book, The Transformative Leader, came to be the same way. It was all a bunch of Post-it notes and voice notes and all that for years and years and years. And then, of course, my daughter kind of got fed up with me and took over the project. So we're going to turn this into a book. But I love it because it's not like, okay, so I'm going to write a book. Okay, what do I write about? Okay, let me come up with a model. That's kind of going backwards. But
no, exactly.
You've taken all of your experiences and they've kind of culminated in what has turned out to be a really fantastic book, Monica. So congratulations on your success with the book, and I know it's going to make a huge difference for folks. So if we were to kind of think about, and I know this is kind of an unfair question because there's so much to do and so much to think about and so much to be. But if you were to leave our listeners with a couple of pieces of advice relative to this space, just really getting better and going from intent to impact, what would you say, and where would you have them start? And I know you said you'd start with yourself, but what is the thought that you want to leave our listeners with?
I would say it is about hold your opinions softly. It's almost like don't get too tight in this is what I think and I'm going to prove to everybody why I think this way. Allow yourself to ask more questions than making statements. There's a great power in a question. And instead of asking somebody or saying to somebody, no, you're wrong, let me tell you why, it's unpacking that and saying, tell me how you came to that conclusion. Help me understand why you think that way. Help me understand why you think that way. And it's the power of a simple question that starts with curiosity, not judgment. We all have opinions about things, and that's perfectly fine. It's based on our experiences. It's based on our life. It's based on our values, things that we've learned in life. Well, we have only lived our own lives. It doesn't mean that that makes us experts on everybody else's life, or that gives us the privilege of thinking that our opinion is valid for the experiences of others. So again, it's just to say, hold your opinions softly and allow yourself to ask questions to understand the experiences, life experiences of others. It's amazing what one can learn.
I love that. Hold your opinions softly. And I can tell you, having, lived in different places, Thailand and Germany, and yeah, I grew up in Iran and all this, particularly when you think about, going across cultures, it's so important not to interpret like what you see based on your own filters.
Exactly.
But what I always also talk about is that when we went to Thailand, the company I was working for put us through a week of training because they said, look, the culture is so different here. You need some training. But then when we went to Germany, they just kind of said, you're on your own because this is kind of like a Western culture, kind of like ours. And I was thinking, you know what, that was the worst thing that they could do because we had a false sense of, oh yeah, we kind of know how things work here. And that was the furthest thing from the truth. So sometimes you just have to wake up and recognize that whether it looks different or whatever else, don't assume that what you're seeing exactly translates through the same for that person as it translates for you through your own filters. So I love this, hold your opinions softly and inquire and ask questions. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Monica. I mean, this is congratulations again on your
Thank
book and the
you.
great work
Thank
that
you,
you've
Amir.
been doing, not just your book, but for the years of contribution that you've made. I know our conversations have always been great. I've enjoyed them and they've made an impact on me. And I know you're going to continue to make a tremendous impact on everybody. Now, if our listeners or viewers want to get a hold of you, find out more about what you do, could you please share? And we'll put this in the notes as well, but how can they get a hold of you, find out more about your book and you and what you do?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the first thing is the book, it's on Amazon. So you can buy it in, hard copy or an ebook. And there's a gift on chapter 10.
Okay.
So I would not, have any spoiler alert, but there's the gift on chapter 10. When you finish the book, there's the gift for you to have more. So get to it. And including my email. I mean, it's no secret. It's Monica, Monica at diversityinclusion-md, my initials.com. And you can email me. You can go to the website that is the diversitydualities.com. Simple. It's part of the title of the book. And you can leave me messages there as well. And we can continue the conversation. So we can unpack beyond the book and, similar to what you and I have done here in this conversation, to discuss how people can relate or would be curious about this topic, about discovering the dualities and how to apply them in their lives and in their work. So thank you, Amir, for the opportunity to speak about this topic with you. I've always enjoyed our conversations as well. They're always deep and meaningful to me. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.